The grandmother's weathered hands trembled slightly as she pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders. The small living room was dimly lit by a single lamp, casting long shadows across the faded wallpaper. 10-year-old Emma sat cross-legged on the carpet, her wide eyes fixed on her grandmother's face. "Grandma Rose, you look sad tonight," Emma whispered, scooting closer to the old rocking chair. "Did something happen?" Rose looked down at her granddaughter's innocent face, those bright blue eyes so full of trust and love. How could she explain? How could she tell this sweet child about the night that nearly broke her spirit completely? "Oh, my dear Emma," Rose said softly, her voice carrying the weight of years. "Sometimes the people we love the most can hurt us the deepest. And sometimes our own family can turn their backs on us when we need them most." Emma frowned, tilting her head. "But family is supposed to love each other, right? That's what Mommy always says." A bitter smile crossed Rose's lips. "That's what I used to believe too, sweetheart. Until the night my own granddaughter, your cousin Sarah, locked me outside in the pouring rain like I was nothing more than a stray dog." The room fell silent except for the gentle tick of the old grandfather clock in the corner. Emma's mouth dropped open in shock. She really did that to you, Grandma?" Rose nodded slowly, her eyes growing distant as the painful memory surfaced. "It was 3 years ago, during the worst storm our town had seen in decades. I had been living with Sarah and her husband Mike for 2 years after your grandfather passed away. I thought I had found a safe place to spend my golden years." She paused, reaching for the glass of water on the small table beside her chair. Her hands shook slightly, not from age, but from the emotion that still gripped her heart when she remembered that terrible night. "I had given them everything, Emma. Everything. When Sarah lost her job, I used my life savings to help them keep their house. When Mike got sick, I worked double shifts at the diner downtown, even though my arthritis made every step painful. I scrubbed their floors until my knees bled. I cooked their meals, did their laundry, watched their children." Emma reached out and gently touched her grandmother's hand. "You did all that for them?" "I did it because I loved them," Rose continued, her voice growing stronger. "Because family means sacrifice. Because when you love someone, you give everything you have, even if it means you have nothing left for yourself." The old woman's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. She had cried enough tears over Sarah's betrayal. "But love, real love, it should go both ways, shouldn't it, Emma? It should be a circle, not a one-way street." Emma nodded eagerly, though Rose could see the confusion in her young face. How could a 10-year-old understand the complexity of adult relationships? How could she comprehend that sometimes the very people you'd die for would rather see you disappear? "That night," Rose continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, "I overheard Sarah talking to her friend on the phone. She was in the kitchen, and I was in my little room, which used to be their storage closet, by the way. The walls were thin, and I could hear every word." Rose closed her eyes, and suddenly she was back in that cramped, stuffy room, listening to words that cut through her heart like broken glass. "I can't stand having her here anymore, Jessica," Rose repeated in Sarah's voice, the words still fresh in her memory after all these years. "She's like a ghost haunting our house. Mike and I can't have any privacy. The kids are tired of sharing their space. And honestly, she smells like old people and mothballs. I just want my house back." Emma gasped, her small hands flying to cover her mouth. "She said that about you?" "Oh, but that wasn't the worst part," Rose said, opening her eyes to look at her granddaughter. "The worst part was what came next. Jessica asked her why she didn't just ask me to leave, and Sarah laughed. Actually laughed, Emma. Like it was the funniest thing in the world." Rose's voice grew cold as she continued. "Because she has nowhere else to go, and she knows it. But I've been thinking, if something were to happen, if she had to leave suddenly, she'd have to figure something out, wouldn't she? Maybe it's time for the old bird to learn to fly on her own. The silence in the room was deafening. Even the grandfather clock seemed to have stopped ticking. Emma's eyes were wide with shock and disbelief. I sat in that tiny room for hours after that phone call, Rose continued. I stared at the four walls that had become my prison, thinking about everything I had given up, everything I had sacrificed. My own house, my independence, my dignity, all gone. She looked down at Emma, whose young face was filled with confusion and hurt. But you know what hurt the most, sweetheart? It wasn't the cruel words or even the betrayal. It was realizing that I had been fooling myself all along. I thought I was living with family who loved me. But I was really just a burden they were too polite to throw away. What did you do, Grandma? Emma asked in a small voice. Rose smiled then, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had learned to survive the unsurvivable. I made a decision that night, Emma. I decided that if Sarah wanted me gone so badly, I would help her get her wish. But I also decided something else, something much more important. She leaned forward in her chair, her eyes meeting Emma's directly. I decided that I was worth more than being treated like garbage by people who were supposed to love me. I decided that even if I had to start over at 78 years old, I would rather live with dignity than stay where I wasn't wanted. Emma scooted closer, hanging on every word. The next morning, I could feel the tension in the house like electricity before a storm. Sarah barely looked at me during breakfast. Mike mumbled something about needing to fix the gutters and disappeared into the garage. Their kids, your little cousins Tommy and Lisa, they sensed something was wrong too. They kept giving me these sad, confused looks. Rose paused, remembering the heaviness that had settled over the house that day. Around noon, the rain started. Just a few drops at first, but the weather report said a major storm was coming. I remember standing at the kitchen window, watching the clouds roll in, and thinking how fitting it was. It felt like the weather was matching my mood perfectly. Then what happened? Emma whispered, completely captivated by the story. Rose's expression grew dark. Then, my dear Emma, I learned just how cruel people can be when they think no one is watching. Just how far someone will go when they want you gone, but don't have the courage to say it to your face. She stood up slowly from her rocking chair, her old bones creaking in protest. Walking to the window, she gazed out at the peaceful night sky, so different from that terrible storm 3 years ago. But I also learned something else that night, she said, turning back to Emma with a mysterious glint in her eyes. I learned that sometimes, when people think they are being clever, they are actually being very, very foolish. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe has a way of making things right. Emma jumped to her feet, her face flushed with excitement and worry. What do you mean, Grandma? What happened that night? Tell me. Rose chuckled softly, settling back into her chair. Oh, my sweet Emma. That's quite a story. Are you sure you want to hear it? It gets much harder before it gets better. Yes? Emma exclaimed, plopping back down on the carpet. I want to know everything. I want to know how you survived. I want to know what Sarah did, and what happened next. Rose nodded, her weathered face softening with love for her granddaughter. This child, at least, truly cared about her. This child would listen to her story without judgment, would understand that sometimes life forces you to make impossible choices. All right then, Rose said, settling deeper into her chair. But first, let me get us some tea. This is going to be a long night, and you're going to need something warm to hold on to, when I tell you about the moment my own granddaughter decided I was worth less than the rain-soaked clothes on my back. As Rose slowly made her way to the kitchen, Emma remained on the floor, her mind racing with questions, and her heart already aching for her grandmother. She could sense that this story was going to change everything she thought she knew about family, about love, and about the strength it takes to survive when the people who are supposed to protect you become the ones you need protection from. Rose returned from the kitchen carrying 2 steaming mugs of chamomile tea. She handed one to Emma, who wrapped her small fingers around the warm ceramic, needing the comfort as much as the heat. The storm outside had been building in Rose's story, and Emma could almost feel the rain that was coming. Now, where was I? Rose asked, settling back into her rocking chair with a soft groan. You were going to tell me about the night Sarah locked you out, Emma said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The night everything changed. Rose nodded, her eyes growing distant again. Yes. That night. You know, Emma, I've lived through many storms in my 78 years. I survived the winter when your grandfather lost his job, and we had to choose between heating oil and groceries. I lived through the tornado that took our barn and half our roof. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the storm that was about to hit my heart. She took a slow sip of her tea, gathering strength from the warmth. It was around 4 o'clock when the real rain started. Not just drops anymore, but sheets of water coming down like God had turned on every faucet in heaven. The wind was howling something fierce, bending the old oak tree in their backyard nearly in half. Emma pulled a throw pillow into her lap, hugging it tight. Were you scared? Scared? No, sweetheart. I was tired. Bone deep, soul-crushing tired. You see, I had spent the whole day walking on eggshells, trying to stay out of Sarah's way, trying to make myself invisible in a house where I clearly wasn't wanted anymore. Rose's voice grew heavier with each word. I had cleaned their bathroom until it sparkled. I had folded 3 loads of laundry and put it all away. I had made a pot roast for dinner, Mike's favorite, and set the table with their good china, thinking maybe if I tried extra hard, if I showed them how useful I could be. She trailed off, shaking her head at her own foolishness. But useful isn't the same as wanted, is it, Emma? You can scrub floors until your knees bleed, but you can't scrub away the resentment in someone's heart. What happened at dinner? Emma asked, though she was almost afraid to hear the answer. Rose's laugh was bitter. Dinner? Oh, what a performance that was. Sarah barely touched the pot roast. She kept checking her phone, sighing like the weight of the world was on her shoulders. Mike ate in complete silence, not even a thank you or this tastes good. And the children, poor Tommy and Lisa, could feel the tension. They kept looking back and forth between their mother and me like they were watching a tennis match. The old woman stood up and walked to the small bookshelf, running her finger along the spine of an old photo album. About halfway through the meal, Sarah finally spoke up. Grandma Rose, she said, and her voice was so sweet, so fake, it made my stomach turn. Mike and I have been talking, and we think maybe it's time for you to explore other living arrangements. Emma gasped. She said that during dinner. Oh, but she wasn't done, Rose continued, turning back to face her granddaughter. She went on to explain how they needed their space as a growing family. How they thought I might be happier somewhere with people my own age. She made it sound like she was doing me a favor, Emma. Like throwing me out was the most generous thing she could possibly do. Rose returned to her chair, her movements slower now, as if the memory itself was weighing her down. I looked at Mike, hoping he might speak up, might show even a tiny bit of the gratitude he should have felt for everything I'd done for his family. But he just kept eating, like I wasn't even there. Like I was already a ghost. What did you say, Grandma? I asked them where they expected me to go. I reminded them that I had given them my life savings to help with their mortgage. I had sold my own house to help pay for Mike's medical bills when he was sick. I had nowhere to go, no money left, no other family who could take me in. Rose's voice cracked slightly. And you know what Sarah said? She said, "That's not really our problem anymore, is it? You're an adult. You'll figure something out." Emma's eyes filled with tears. She was so mean to you. Mean doesn't begin to cover it, sweetheart. But the worst was yet to come. Rose took a shaky breath before continuing. After dinner, I went to my little room and tried to think. Where could a 78-year-old woman with arthritis and no money possibly go? I thought about calling the church, maybe seeing if they knew of anyone who needed help with housekeeping in exchange for a place to sleep. I thought about the homeless shelter downtown, though the very idea made me feel sick. You shouldn't have had to think about those things, Emma said fiercely, her young voice filled with indignation. No, I shouldn't have. But that's the thing about betrayal, Emma. It forces you to face realities you never thought you'd have to consider. Rose looked toward the window where rain was now beginning to fall, a gentle shower, nothing like the storm in her story. Around 9 o'clock that night, the storm got even worse. The lights started flickering, and the wind was rattling the windows something fierce. I heard Sarah and Mike talking in hushed voices in their bedroom down the hall, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. She paused, her hands gripping the arms of her rocking chair. Then, around 10:30, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Quiet footsteps, like someone trying not to wake the children. I thought maybe one of them was going to the kitchen for a glass of water, so I didn't think much of it. But then, Rose's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Then I heard the front door close. Not slam, you understand. Close. Quietly, carefully. Like someone was trying to be sneaky about it. Emma leaned forward, hanging on every word. What did you do? At first, nothing. I figured Mike had gone outside to check on something, maybe secure some patio furniture, or move his truck. But then I heard something that made my blood run cold. Rose met Emma's eyes directly. I heard the deadbolt slide into place. That heavy, final sound of a lock turning. And then I heard Sarah's voice, clear as day through the thin walls, "There. Now maybe she'll get the message." Emma's hand flew to her mouth. "She locked you in?" "No, sweetheart," Rose said, her voice heavy with pain and disbelief. "She locked me out. You see, I had stepped onto the back porch about 20 minutes earlier to bring in some dish towels I had hung on the line. I thought they might stay drier under the porch roof than out in the rain. I was only going to be outside for a minute." The realization hit Emma like a physical blow. "She knew you were outside? In the storm?" Rose nodded slowly. "She knew exactly where I was. She had watched me go out there. And she made a choice, Emma. She chose to lock the door behind me and leave me in the worst storm our town had seen in years. But that's..." Emma struggled to find words horrible enough. "That could have killed you." "I think that might have been the idea," Rose said quietly. "Or maybe she just thought I'd be so desperate to get back inside that I'd beg, that I'd promise to leave the next day, that I'd finally understand just how unwelcome I really was." Rose stood up again, this time walking to the small mirror hanging on the wall. She stared at her reflection, the weathered face, the silver hair, the eyes that had seen too much pain. "I stood on that porch for 10 minutes, Emma, pounding on the door and calling their names. The rain was coming down in sheets, soaking through my thin nightgown and robe. My slippers were falling apart, and the cold was seeping into my bones." She turned back to Emma, and her granddaughter could see tears glistening in her eyes. But the worst part wasn't the cold or the rain. The worst part was hearing their television get louder. They turned up the volume so they wouldn't have to hear me knocking. So they could pretend I wasn't out there, freezing and desperate and completely at their mercy. Emma was crying now, hot tears streaming down her cheeks. "How could she do that to you? How could anyone do that to their own grandmother? Rose came back to her chair and gently wiped Emma's tears with her thumb. That's the question I asked myself over and over that night, standing in that storm. How does someone's heart become so cold? How do you look at a person who raised you, who sacrificed everything for you, and decide they are worth less than the dirt under your shoes? What did you do? How did you survive? Rose smiled then, and for the first time since she started her story, there was a hint of something other than sadness in her expression. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. Well, my dear Emma, that's when I remembered something very important. Something Sarah had forgotten in all her cruelty and selfishness. Emma wiped her nose on her sleeve, looking up at her grandmother with desperate hope. What? What did you remember? Rose's smile grew wider, and Emma caught a glimpse of the strong, determined woman her grandmother must have been in her younger days. I remembered that sometimes, when people think they are being clever, they are actually being very, very stupid. And I remembered that I had been taking care of myself long before Sarah was even born. I might have been cold and wet and heartbroken, but I was far from helpless. She leaned forward in her chair, her eyes twinkling with a secret. You see, Emma, there was something Sarah didn't know. Something she had never bothered to ask about, something she had never thought to consider in all her planning to get rid of me. What, Grandma? What didn't she know? Rose chuckled, a sound full of satisfaction and long-awaited justice. She didn't know that sometimes, the person you're trying to destroy has a few cards left to play. And sometimes, those cards can change everything. Emma wiped her tears away, her young face a mixture of heartbreak and burning curiosity. Outside, the gentle rain continued to fall, but it seemed peaceful now compared to the storm in Rose's story. Grandma, please, Emma whispered. Tell me what Sarah didn't know. Tell me how you survived that terrible night. Rose settled back in her rocking chair, and Emma noticed something different about her grandmother's posture. She sat straighter now, her chin lifted with a pride that hadn't been there before. Well, my dear Emma, let me tell you about the longest night of my life, and how it became the first night of my new life. Rose's eyes sparkled as she continued. There I was, soaked to the bone, standing on that back porch while my own granddaughter pretended I didn't exist. The wind was howling, the rain was coming down sideways, and I was shivering so hard my teeth were chattering like castanets. You must have been so scared. Emma said softly. Scared? Yes. But you know what else I was, sweetheart? I was angry. Angrier than I had been in my entire 78 years on this earth. And sometimes, anger can be a powerful thing when it's mixed with the right kind of determination. Rose stood up and walked to her small writing desk in the corner of the room. She opened the top drawer and pulled out a yellowed envelope. You see this, Emma? This is what Sarah didn't know about. This is the card I had left to play. Emma leaned forward, squinting at the envelope. What is it? This, my dear child, is the deed to the house. The house that Sarah was so eager to throw me out of. Emma's mouth dropped open. But I thought it was their house. Rose's smile was triumphant. That's what they thought too. That's what I let them think. But you see, when Mike got sick 2 years earlier and they couldn't make their mortgage payments, when they came to me crying and begging for help, I didn't just give them money, Emma. I bought their house. You bought it. Lock, stock, and barrel. I paid off their entire mortgage, and had the deed transferred to my name. But I was a fool, you see. I was so worried about hurting their pride, so concerned about making them feel like charity cases, that I told them we could work out the details later. I let them go on thinking it was still their house, that they were just borrowing money from dear old Grandma Rose. Emma's eyes grew wide as the implications sank in. So when Sarah locked you out, she locked the rightful owner out of her own house, Rose finished with satisfaction. She threw the person who had saved their home out into a storm, never knowing that I could have thrown them out any time I wanted. Rose returned to her chair, clutching the envelope like a treasure. But standing on that porch that night, soaking wet and heartbroken, I realized something important. I realized that I had been enabling their cruelty by being too kind, too generous, too afraid of hurting their feelings. I had taught them to take me for granted by never setting boundaries, never demanding respect. "What did you do?" Emma asked breathlessly. Rose chuckled, and this time the sound was full of righteous satisfaction. "Well, first I had to survive the night. I couldn't stay on that porch, I would have caught pneumonia for sure. So I remembered that Mike always kept a spare key hidden under the garden gnome by the garage." "You had a key?" "I had a key to my own house," Rose corrected with emphasis. "But I didn't use it to go back inside and confront them." "No, Emma, I had learned something valuable that night. I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting angry, it's getting smart." Rose's eyes gleamed with memory. "I used that key to get into the garage, where I spent the night in Mike's old recliner, covered with some painting tarps. It wasn't comfortable, but it was dry and it was safe. And it gave me time to think." "What did you think about?" "I thought about dignity, Emma. I thought about self-respect. I thought about the difference between being kind and being a doormat. And I thought about what I was going to do come morning." Rose paused to sip her tea, letting the suspense build. "The next morning, I waited until I heard them all leave Mike to work, Sarah to take the kids to school. Then I let myself into my house and packed my few belongings. I called a taxi and went straight to see my lawyer, old Mr. Henderson downtown." "What did you tell him?" "I told him exactly what had happened. I told him about the cruelty, the ingratitude, and the fact that I had been locked out of my own home during a dangerous storm. Mr. Henderson was appalled, absolutely appalled. He said what Sarah had done could have been considered elder abuse, maybe even attempted, well, never mind what else." Emma was hanging on every word. "Then what happened?" "Mr. Henderson and I drew up some papers. Legal papers. And then we paid a little visit to Sarah and Mike." Rose's smile turned mischievous. "Oh, Emma, I wish you could have seen their faces when Mr. Henderson knocked on their door at 3 o'clock that afternoon." Sarah answered, still in her pajamas, probably thinking she had gotten rid of me so easily. "What did they say?" At first, Sarah tried to play innocent. "Oh, Grandma Rose. We were so worried about you. Where did you go last night?" "We looked everywhere." Rose's voice dripped with sarcasm, as she imitated Sarah's fake concern. But Mr. Henderson cut right through her lies. He said, "Mrs. Patterson, we have reason to believe you deliberately locked Mrs. Rose Williams out of her own property during a severe weather event. We are here to discuss the legal implications of your actions." Emma gasped. "Her own property?" You should have seen the color drain from Sarah's face when Mr. Henderson pulled out that deed. She went white as a sheet, then red as a tomato, then white again. Mike came running when he heard the commotion, and when he saw those papers, he actually sat down hard on the couch like his legs had given out. Rose chuckled at the memory. Sarah started stammering about how she didn't know, how they thought I had just loaned them money, how it was all a misunderstanding. But Mr. Henderson wasn't having any of it. He explained very clearly that I owned the house, that I had every right to evict them immediately, and that their treatment of me could result in criminal charges. "Were you going to throw them out?" Emma asked. Rose's expression grew thoughtful. "You know, Emma, I could have made them pack their bags that very day and left them to figure out where to go, just like they had planned to do to me. I could have given them a taste of their own medicine. But you didn't." "No, I didn't. Because I'm not Sarah, Emma. I'm not cruel. I'm not heartless. And I didn't want to hurt those children. Your little cousins Tommy and Lisa didn't deserve to suffer for their mother's mistakes. Rose leaned forward, her voice growing serious. But I also wasn't going to be anyone's doormat ever again. So Mr. Henderson and I presented them with an agreement. What kind of agreement? They could continue living in the house, but they would pay me rent, fair market rent. They would treat me with respect if I ever visited. And they would acknowledge, in writing, that they understood I owned the property and that their previous behavior had been unacceptable. Emma was quiet for a moment, processing everything. Did they sign it? They didn't have much choice, did they? It was either that or find themselves homeless with 2 young children and terrible credit. They signed that agreement so fast you would have thought it was on fire. Rose stood up and walked to the window, gazing out at the peaceful night. But you know what the best part was, Emma? The very best part of all. What, Grandma? Rose turned back with a smile that lit up her entire face. 3 days later, there was an article in our local newspaper. Local woman finds new purpose after life change. It was about me, Emma. About how I had taken the money from the rent and used it to put a down payment on this little house, our house. About how I had started volunteering at the community center, teaching other seniors about financial planning and property rights. Emma looked around the cozy living room with new eyes. This is your house. Your very own house. My very own house, Rose confirmed proudly. No one can ever lock me out of here, Emma. No one can make me feel unwelcome in my own home. And no one can take advantage of my kindness ever again, because I've learned the difference between being generous and being foolish. Emma jumped up and hugged her grandmother tightly. I'm so proud of you, Grandma. You showed them. Rose hugged her granddaughter back, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the tea or the cozy room. I showed myself something even more important, sweetheart. I showed myself that I still had fight left in me. That I was worth standing up for, even if I had to do it myself. What about Sarah and Mike? Do you ever see them? Rose's expression grew thoughtful. Mike came by about 6 months later to apologize. Really apologize, not the fake kind Sarah had tried to give. He admitted that he had been a coward, that he should have stood up for me, that he was ashamed of how they had treated me. We had a good talk, and I forgave him. And Sarah? Rose sighed softly. Sarah is a harder case. She's never actually apologized, never admitted she did anything wrong. She sends me birthday cards now, and she brings the children by once in a while, but there's still that wall between us. She can't forgive me for not staying in the role she wanted me in, the grateful, powerless old woman who would take whatever scraps of affection she threw my way. Emma frowned. That's not fair. No, it's not. But you know what I learned, Emma? I learned that I can't control other people's hearts. I can't make Sarah love me the way I loved her. I can't make her grateful for the sacrifices I made. All I can control is how I respond to the way I'm treated. Rose sat back down and pulled Emma close. And I responded by choosing myself for once. I chose my own dignity, my own self-respect, my own right to be treated like a human being instead of a burden. Are you happy now, Grandma? Rose looked around her small, cozy living room at the pictures of family who truly loved her, at the books she enjoyed reading, at the comfortable furniture she had chosen herself. She thought about her volunteer work at the community center, the friends she had made, the independence she had reclaimed. I'm more than happy, Emma. I'm free. Free to be myself without apologizing for it. Free to love the people who love me back without wasting energy on those who don't. Free to live the rest of my life on my own terms. Emma snuggled closer to her grandmother. I love you, Grandma Rose. And I would never, ever lock you out in the rain. Rose kissed the top of Emma's head, breathing in the sweet scent of her granddaughter's hair. I know you wouldn't, sweetheart. And that's how I know that even though I lost one granddaughter that stormy night, I still have the most precious one right here with me. As the gentle rain continued to fall outside, Rose held Emma close and marveled at how different this peaceful shower felt from that terrible storm 3 years ago. That storm had nearly broken her, but it had also revealed strengths she didn't know she still possessed. Sometimes, Rose reflected, life has to tear you down completely before you can build yourself back up the right way. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to find everything you actually need. And sometimes, the people who try to destroy you end up giving you the greatest gift of all, the gift of discovering just how strong you really are. Now then, Rose said, gently stroking Emma's hair as the child dozed against her shoulder, I think that's enough storytelling for one night. Tomorrow, we'll make pancakes for breakfast, and I'll tell you about all the wonderful things that have happened since I learned to stand up for myself. But Emma was already fast asleep, dreaming of storms that turn into sunshine, of grandmothers who are stronger than anyone imagines, and of the kind of love that never locks doors, but always opens them wide.